Good evening, listeners. My name is EveningWhisperTales. Tonight, I'll be telling you some scary horror stories to help you relax and fall asleep. If you enjoy this channel, I'd really appreciate it if you like and subscribe. Now, let's begin our evening together. Story 1. My daughter says someone answers from under her bed. It didn't start with screaming. That was what confused me most later, when I tried to pinpoint the moment things went wrong. If she'd woken up crying or run into our room shaking, I would have reacted instantly. Instead, it started with conversation. Soft, polite, almost cheerful. I heard it while walking past her room on my way to the laundry room, arms full of towels, the hallway lights dimmed for the night. Her door was cracked open just enough for the glow of her nightlight to spill into the carpet, and I slowed because I thought she was talking to herself again. She did that sometimes, made up stories for her stuffed animals, whispered to dolls lined up on her pillow, narrated whole imaginary adventures after we thought she'd fallen asleep. "No, Daddy says that's too late," she murmured. I smiled and kept walking. Then she laughed, not giggled, not silly kid laughter. A small, breathy sound like she'd heard something clever. "Okay, tomorrow then." I stopped, laundry slipping in my arms. She hadn't been talking to any toys. I'd cleaned her room that morning. Everything was stacked neatly on the shelf across from her bed, not arranged in the semicircle she liked when she played. I leaned closer to her door. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" She answered immediately. "The man under my bed." The towels hit the floor. I pushed the door open the rest of the way. She lay flat on her back, hands folded on her stomach, staring at the ceiling like she was watching shadows drift across it. "There's nobody under there," I said automatically, already crossing the room. She didn't look at me. "He says you always say that." I dropped to my knees and lifted the comforter. Dark space, dust bunnies, a pink sock she'd kicked too far. Nothing else. I slid my hand under anyway, sweeping the carpet. Empty. When I stood up, she finally turned her head. "You scared him." "I didn't scare anyone," I said gently. "There's nothing there." She frowned. "Yes, there is." I sat on the edge of the bed. "Tell me what he looks like." She thought for a second. "He's tall but folded." "Folded how?" "Like when I bend my paper airplanes wrong." My stomach tightened. "What's his name?" He didn't say yet. I stayed until she fell asleep, then told my wife what happened while we folded laundry downstairs. She laughed a little too fast. "Kids say weird stuff." "I know, it just felt creepy." I nodded. She squeezed my arm and said we were both tired. That night, around 1:40 a.m., I woke up to my daughter's voice again. Not crying, talking. I lay still, listening to the quiet house. The refrigerator hummed downstairs, the distant rush of traffic outside, and her soft words drifting down the hall. "No, I can't. Mommy locks the doors." Pause. "I know where the spare key is, but I'm not supposed to tell." I sat up. My wife stirred beside me. I slid out of bed and walked to her room. Door open, night light glowing. She lay on her side, facing the wall. "Sweetie," I whispered. She jumped, rolled over too fast. "Daddy!" "Who were you talking to?" Her face went blank. "Nobody." I knelt. "You were just talking." She looked toward the side of the bed, then back at me. "He doesn't like when I talk about him." My skin prickled. "Who?" "The man." I checked again. Under the bed, closet, behind the door. Nothing. But the air felt wrong near the floor, colder than the rest of the room, like the vent had kicked on even though it hadn't. The next morning, my wife found muddy fingerprints on the underside of the bed frame. 3 of them, small, pressed into the wood slats, upside down, like something underneath had reached up and tested the shape of the mattress. We didn't show our daughter. We cleaned it. Told ourselves it was old marks from when the movers dragged furniture in. That afternoon, she asked if we could raise her bed higher. Why? So he doesn't bump his head anymore. I froze. Bump his head on what? The springs. My wife dropped the sponge in the sink. He hits them when he crawls. Our daughter added, it makes him mad. That night I shoved luggage in storage bins under her bed until there was no room left at all. No shadows, no open space. She watched silently. He says he'll just wait now. For what? She shrugged. For you to move them. I didn't. At 3:12 a.m., something slid across her floor. Slow, plastic scraping wood. I ran down the hall. The bins had been pushed out. All of them, neatly lined up against the opposite wall. The space under the bed was empty again, and from inside the dark gap beneath the Uxa mattress came a quiet voice that was not my daughter's. She wasn't supposed to tell you yet. Story 2. My wife says our son comes into our room every night. The first time she mentioned it, I barely looked up from my phone. We were sitting in bed, lights off except for the soft glow from the screen. Rain tapping against the window while the house settled around us the way it always did at night. My wife was already half asleep, a voice thick and slow when she spoke. Our son came in again. I frowned. When? Earlier, around midnight. He didn't wake me. She rolled onto her side. He didn't wake me either. That should have bothered me more than it did. Kids sneak into their parents' rooms all the time. Bad dreams, thunder, weird noises, thirst, you name it. What did he want? I asked. She didn't answer right away. He just stood there. I turned. Stood there how? By the door. And then what? She hesitated. Then he left. The next morning, I asked my son about it while he ate cereal at the counter. Milk dribbling down his chin as he stared at cartoons on his tablet. You come into our room last night. He shook his head. No, I didn't. Mom said you did. He frowned. I was asleep. Kids lie, but usually badly. He didn't look guilty. That night I stayed awake longer. Lights off. Door cracked. The house went quiet in layers. TV clicking off downstairs, dishwasher finishing its cycle, the heat kicking on and off until it reached that hollow stillness that comes just before sleep. At 12:11 a.m., footsteps whispered down the hallway. Slow, careful, bare feet on hardwood. They stopped outside our bedroom. I didn't move. My wife's breathing stayed steady beside me. A shadow stretched under the door. Short, child height. Someone stood there for a long time. Then it slid away. I got up and opened the door. Hallway empty. My son's door closed, light off. I checked his room. He was sprawled sideways across his bed, mouth open, snoring softly. I stood there longer than necessary. The next night it happened again. 12:09. Same soft steps, same pause, same shadow. This time my wife stirred. See? She whispered. I waited until the shadow faded before opening the door. Empty hall. Third night I waited downstairs instead, sitting on the couch with all the lights off, baseball bat resting against my knee like I was ridiculous enough to think I might need it. At 12:07 a.m., the hallway camera on my phone pinged. Motion detected. The feed showed our hallway, empty. Then something stepped into frame. It looked like my son. Same pajamas, same messy hair, same narrow shoulders. but he moved wrong. Arms hung too low, head tilted forward like his neck couldn't quite hold it up. He stopped outside our bedroom door, raised his hand, didn't knock, just pressed his palm flat against the wood. I ran upstairs. The hallway was empty. The camera feed kept playing. On my phone screen, the thing still stood there, hand against the door, head turning slowly toward the camera, smiling. Behind me, my real son snored in his room, and on the screen, the thing wearing his face opened our bedroom door and stepped inside. Story 3. My neighbor keeps ringing the doorbell. After midnight, the first time it happened, I thought it was a glitch. We'd just moved into the house a month earlier, still learning which floorboards creaked and how long the pipes took to warm up in the morning. Still unpacking boxes that had been shoved into closets until we could deal with them later. The doorbell was one of those new smart ones that recorded video whenever someone approached, and the app buzzed on my phone just after midnight while my wife and I were watching a show in bed. Motion detected at front door. I sighed, rolled onto my side, and checked the feed. The porch was empty. Rain darkened the concrete. The street beyond glowed under orange streetlights. No person, no animal, no movement. Probably a cat, I muttered. My wife didn't look convinced, but we turned off the screen and went back to our show. 20 minutes later it rang. Once, sharp and loud in the quiet house. I checked the camera again. Still nothing. I opened the door a crack anyway. Cold air, wet porch, empty steps. I locked it and went back upstairs. At 12:47 a.m., the doorbell rang again. Same single press. I watched the feed. This time someone stood just out of frame. I could see part of a sleeve, dark fabric, too close to the lens, like they were leaning in from the side. I opened the door faster than I should have. Nobody was there. I walked down the steps, looked left, right, empty sidewalk, no cars, no footprints in the wet concrete. The camera alert came again while I was standing outside. Motion detected, the feed showed me on my porch looking around, and behind me, right where the door was, someone stood. Tall, too thin, face hidden by the camera's blind spot. I spun, nothing. The next night it happened at the same time. 12:41, single ring. The feed showed a woman this time, older, hair hanging in damp gray ropes, standing with her nose inches from the camera, smiling. When I opened the door, she wasn't there. In the morning, my neighbor from across the street asked if everything was okay. You had someone visiting late. Who? He frowned. A man. He stood on your porch for a while. Did he ring? No. He just watched your door. The third night, I waited in the dark by the stairs with the app open, watching the feed. At 12:39, the sidewalk lights flickered. At 12:40, a shape crossed the lawn. At 12:41, it leaned into frame. It looked like my neighbor. Same jacket, same baseball cap, same stooped posture. I didn't open the door. My phone, the figure lifted a hand and rang the bell. In my house, the bell rang. At the same moment, I heard slow footsteps behind me in the hallway, coming down the stairs. Story 4. My wife says she sees someone sitting in the back seat. The first time she said it, we were barely out of the driveway. Morning sun just cresting over rooftops, coffee in the cup holders, radio low while the kids argued in the back about whose turn it was to pick music. My wife glanced into the rear view mirror and frowned, adjusting it twice before leaning forward. Did one of them climb into the middle? I glanced back. Our two kids sat in their seats, buckled, backpacks on the floor between their feet. No, she checked the mirror again. I swear someone was there. I shrugged it off. Light trick, headrest, shadow, road vibration. But she kept glancing back for the rest of the drive. That night she mentioned it again while unloading groceries. In the car, I keep thinking someone's sitting back there. At night too, especially at night. I checked, empty back seat, trunk, footwell, nothing. The next evening, we picked the kids up from soccer practice after dark. I drove. She sat in the passenger seat, scrolling her phone. Halfway home, she grabbed my arm. Slow down. Why? There's someone behind me. I slammed the brakes. The kids lurched forward. I twisted around, empty. What are you talking about? I asked. She was pale. I saw a face between the headrests. We drove home in silence. The following week, she refused to sit in the passenger seat at night, sat behind me instead, said she couldn't see it from there. I cleaned the car, vacuumed, wiped windows, checked under seats. Nothing. Then the dash cam caught it. She was right. We reviewed footage after another incident on the highway, when she'd shouted for me to pull over. At first, the video showed nothing unusual. Headlights, dark road, dashboard glow. Then, between frames, something appeared. A shape in the center seat. No seat belt, no weight on the cushion. Just a darker shadow than the rest of the interior. The next frame showed it closer, leaning forward, its head almost between ours. I paused the video. Zoomed. It didn't have eyes, just smooth skin where a face should have been. My wife whispered, "That's what I see." We sold the car 2 days later. The dealer called that night. "Did you forget something?" I held my breath. "What?" "There's a passenger still listed in the system." "What system?" "The airbag sensor. It says someone's sitting back there." Story 5. My daughter says the closet door breathes at night. It began as one of those things you half hear while drifting towards sleep. The kind of soft sound you chalk up to the house settling or pipe shifting or air vents turning on somewhere down the hall. A slow, shallow exhale, then another. My wife nudged me. "Do you hear that?" I listened. Silence. She shook her head and rolled onto her side. The next night it happened again. Longer this time. A faint rasping sound from our daughter's room across the hall, like someone breathing through their mouth while trying not to be heard. I got up and stood outside her door. Quiet. Nothing. I opened it slowly. She slept curled on her side, stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Nightlight casting soft shapes across the walls. Her closet door was closed. When I stepped inside, the breathing stopped. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening. Nothing. Morning came. She asked if we could keep her closet open. Why? So it can breathe better. My stomach tightened. What can? The door. We laughed it off. Kids say weird stuff. But that night, after she fell asleep, I cracked the closet door an inch. At 2:18 a.m., my phone camera facing the hall lit up, motion alert. I crept out of bed and watched the feed. Her door was closed. A thin sliver of light showed under it. Inside, the sound came back. Slow, wet, breathing. The closet door bulged outward, barely, like someone leaning their weight against it from inside. Then it relaxed, bulged again, harder. The handle turned, not all the way, just enough to click. I rushed in. The door was flat again. My daughter slept. The closet stood open, empty, hanging coat swaying. The next morning, muddy fingerprints dotted the inside of the door. Low, child height, too wide. We took the door off its hinges. She cried. That night the breathing came from the wall. Story 6. My wife says someone stands in the yard. When it rains. The first time she mentioned it, we were standing at the kitchen sink watching water run down the glass in long crooked streaks, thunder muttering far away while the yard blurred into a gray smear of fence posts and tree trunks. There's someone out there. I leaned closer to the window. Rain fell hard enough that visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. The motion light hadn't kicked on. The swing set dripped steadily. The maple tree in the corner swayed. I don't see anyone. She pointed. By the fence. I squinted. Nothing but darkness and water. She didn't argue, just stepped back. Later that night, the rain got heavier, loud enough that it drowned out the television downstairs and rattled the gutters. The kids were asleep. My wife folding laundry on the couch while I flipped through channels, when she froze mid-sock and stared at the sliding glass door. He's back. My stomach tightened. Same answer. Nothing. But she wouldn't sit facing the yard anymore. The next storm came 2 days later. She woke me up at 1:30 a.m., shaking my shoulder. He's closer. Half asleep, I dragged myself to the window. The rain streaked the glass. Motion light on now. Empty. Lawn. You're imagining things. She shook her head. He's under the tree. The maple branches shuddered in the wind. Nothing beneath them. In the morning, she asked if the fence gate was always open. It wasn't. Mud tracked the patio stones in narrow lines like someone had walked barefoot across them. The prints ended at the sliding door, didn't go back. I installed a camera that afternoon, wide angle, night vision, alert straight to my phone. The next storm hit just after midnight. Lightning lit the yard. Thunder rolled so close the windows vibrated. My phone buzzed, motion detected. Backyard. The feed loaded grainy green. The rain streaked across the lens, tree swaying. Fence line. Something stood there, tall, still, right where she'd pointed before. Not moving with the wind, not flinching when lightning flashed, just standing with its head tilted slightly downward, like it was staring at the grass. I zoomed in. It didn't blur, didn't pixelate like rain or shadows usually did. It was solid, human-shaped, too thin, arms hanging lower than they should. I nudged my wife awake and handed her the phone, her face drained. That's him. Lightning flashed again. For one frame, the figure was closer, not walking, just nearer, as if the distance between frames had folded. Then the camera cut out. Black screen. Error message. When it came back, the yard was empty. Fence, tree, swing set, nothing else. The next morning, the camera was still mounted, but the lens was smeared with mud. Finger marks dragged across it, long ones. We stayed inside during storms after that. Canceled backyard barbecues, pulled the curtains closed. But the next time it rained while I was at work, my wife texted me a single picture, taken through the kitchen window. Rain blurring everything except one clear shape standing on the patio. So close to the glass I could see its ribs. Story 7. My son, says the man, in his room only comes when we're awake. It started with a question at breakfast, casual enough that I almost missed the weight of it. Do grown-ups see different things than kids? My son sat across from me, cereal soggy and untouched, while my wife scrolled through emails, sunlight spilling through the windows like everything was normal. What kind of things? I asked. The quiet ones. My wife looked up. What quiet ones? He shrugged and took a bite. Never mind. That afternoon, he refused to nap, sat upright in bed with his stuffed dinosaur clutched tight and his eyes fixed on the corner near his bookshelf. where dusk gathered and shadows didn't quite behave right when the sun went down. "I'm not tired," he said. "You're shaking." He didn't deny it. At dinner, he asked if doors could open without anyone touching them. I told him no. He nodded slowly like he was collecting information. That night, he crawled into our bed at 11:30 and wouldn't let go of my arm. "He's here," he whispered. I sat up. "Who?" "The man." "Where?" "In my room." "Why didn't you stay there?" "He doesn't come when you're asleep." That didn't make sense. "He only comes when you're awake." My wife stared at me. I got up and went with him. His room looked the same as always. Toy cars lined along the shelf, posters crooked on the wall, night light glowing, nothing out of place. I checked the closet, under the bed, behind the curtains, nothing. I tucked him back in and left the door open. He didn't relax. I stayed up, sat on the couch with the TV off and the hallway light dimmed, listening to the house settle while my wife dozed beside me. At 12:47 a.m., the hallway camera pinged, motion. The feed showed my son's door, closed, then the handle turned, slowly, without opening. Then it turned back. The door didn't move. Inside the room, something shifted. My son called out softly, "He's standing next to you now." I spun, nothing behind me. On the camera feed, the door opened, just a crack. A shadow stretched across the carpet, tall, thin, too long. The camera flickered. When it steadied, the door was closed again. In the morning, my son said the man was disappointed. About what? That you didn't go in. Story 8. My wife keeps finding wet handprints on the ceiling. The first time she noticed them, she thought the roof was leaking. We were standing in the upstairs hallway folding laundry, warm afternoon light coming through the skylight, while she reached up to run a finger along one of the darker spots near the corner where the ceiling met the wall. "It's damp!" I grabbed a chair and climbed up. The patch wasn't spreading like water damage usually does. It wasn't dripping, it was shaped. 5 narrow streaks trailing downward, another cluster nearby, both about 8 feet, off the floor, higher than either of us could reach. "They look like hands," she said. I didn't answer. We checked the attic. Dry insulation, no pipes, no animals, no leaks. That night she woke me up because she could hear something above us, not scurrying, not scratching. A slow dragging sound, like palms sliding across drywall. I lay there listening. Every time I shifted, it stopped. In the morning, there were more marks leading down the hallway, across the ceiling over our bedroom door. The kids started asking why the ceiling looked dirty. We told them it was dust. I set up a camera angled upward. At 2:36 a.m., my phone buzzed, motion detected. The feed showed the hallway, dark. Then something pressed into the ceiling from above, not cracking through, just bulging downward, a shape like a shoulder. Then a handprint appeared. From the inside, 5 fingers stretching outward, dragging itself along. The camera glitched when it came back. The ceiling was smooth, clean, bone dry. The attic access panel in the hall hung open. In the morning, my wife asked why I'd been in the attic. I hadn't. Inside the attic, insulation had been pushed aside in a long path, like something had crawled through it, toward the far corner, where the roof sloped low enough that no person could fit. Something had written in the dust with one long finger, "Stop looking up." Story 9. My daughter's shadow doesn't always copy her. It started during a blackout. A summer storm knocked the power out just before dinner. leaving the house quiet except for rain tapping against windows and the kids groaning about losing Wi-Fi. We lit candles and set them along the counter while my daughter traced shapes on the wall with her hands, laughing when the shadows stretched and warped. I was refilling a glass when she froze. "Daddy!" "What?" "My shadow's wrong." I looked. Her silhouette leaned against the wall, sharp-edged and tall. She lifted her arm. The shadow raised its arm too. I shrugged. "Looks fine." She lifted her other arm. The shadow hesitated, then followed. I told her it was the flicker from the candle flame. She didn't argue. She backed away from the wall. The shadow stayed. The lights came back on 10 minutes later and we forgot about it. 2 days later, she mentioned it again while brushing her teeth. "It keeps doing that." "Doing what?" "Waiting." That night, I stood in the hallway while she played with a flashlight against the wall. Beam steady, no flicker. She waved, shadow waved. She stopped, shadow kept moving. She dropped the flashlight. I turned on the overhead light. The shadow snapped back into place. Behind her. The next morning, she asked if shadows could leave. "No," I said, "even if they want to." The following week, it started happening in daylight. Sunlight through the windows. She stood still. Her shadow shifted anyway. Stretched, thin, reaching for the baseboards. We kept her away from windows, closed curtains, moved lamps. At school, her teacher called asking why she kept switching seats. She says she doesn't want to sit near the wall. One afternoon, I found chalk drawings in the driveway. 2 outlines, one child, one taller, holding hands. I scrubbed them away. That night, she woke screaming. Said her shadow tried to climb into bed with her. I slept in her room after that. At 3:02 a.m., moonlight crept through the blinds. Her shadow peeled itself off the wall and slid across the floor. Toward me. Story 10. My wife keeps talking to someone in the garage. It began with a noise I only noticed because it didn't belong. We were finishing dinner when I heard the garage door creak upward, the heavy motor whining as it lifted even though neither of us had touched the button mounted near the pantry. I wiped my hands on a towel and glanced at my wife. "Did you hit the opener?" She shook her head. "No." The door continued rising until it hit the top with a hollow metallic thunk. Through the narrow window in the back door, I could see the light in the garage had switched on by itself, flooding the concrete with that harsh fluorescent glow that always made the space feel colder than the rest of the house. I opened the door. Empty garage. Car parked crooked like I'd left it that morning. Tool shelves lining the walls, boxes stacked in the corners. No movement. I shrugged and shut it. 5 minutes later, while we were clearing plates, I heard her voice. Low, muffled, coming from the garage. I froze. My wife was supposed to be in the living room with me. "You hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" I stared. "You were just talking." She frowned. "I haven't moved." We stood still, listening. Nothing. Later that night, while brushing our teeth upstairs, the door opener hummed again. This time she was in front of me at the sink. We heard it together. The motor dragged the door up, light clicking on, silence after. "I'll check it," I said. She followed anyway. The garage was empty again, except the ladder had been pulled out from the wall and leaned beneath the ceiling access panel. We didn't own a ceiling hatch. I was sure of it. I pushed the ladder back. The next morning, it was under the panel again, and the panel was cracked open. That afternoon, she texted me from work. "Did you come home earlier?" I told her no. Someone was in the garage again. I left early. When I got there, the garage door was open, light on, car gone. I panicked until I realized it was still in the driveway. The space where it had been was damp, 2 tire-shaped puddles, as if it had been parked somewhere wet before being put back. That night I waited in the dark. Garage door closed, lights off, house quiet. At 12:44 a.m., the opener clicked. The door rose slowly. I stayed, behind the kitchen door, peeking through the glass. The light turned on. My wife stood in the middle of the garage, barefoot, in her pajamas, facing the far wall, talking. I rushed out. She spun around. "What are you doing?" She blinked. "I thought you were in here." I wasn't. She glanced behind her. He left. "Who?" "The man who stands by the freezer." There is no freezer in our garage, only shelves, tool racks, boxes. We installed cameras the next day. Front, garage, side yard, motion alerts armed overnight. At 1:11 a.m., my phone buzzed. The garage feed showed the door rising, light switching on. My wife stepped inside, then stopped, stared upward. Something above the shelves moved, not fast, not slow, careful, long, like a body lowering itself from the rafters. I ran downstairs. The garage was empty, my wife asleep in bed. The ladder stood under the ceiling panel again, and muddy fingerprints marked the freezer-shaped outline on the wall. Story 11. My daughter keeps saying someone walks home beside her. She first mentioned it while kicking her shoes off at the door after school, backpack thumping against the wall as she dumped it in its usual place and headed for the kitchen, asking if there were any snacks. I was halfway through chopping vegetables and only half listening when she added, almost as an afterthought, that the man didn't like apples. I paused with the knife hovering over the cutting board and asked what man she was talking about, expecting her to shrug and say a teacher or a crossing guard or maybe one of the parents who waited by the sidewalk every afternoon. Instead, she opened the fridge, stared inside for a moment, and said, "The one who walks next to me but doesn't step on the sidewalk." That was enough to make me turn around. I asked her what she meant, and she explained in the vague but certain way kids have when they assume you already know the rules of the world, that he stayed in the grass the whole way from the bus stop to our street, even when it was muddy and even when sprinklers were running, and that he kept his hands in his pockets and his head down like he was shy. When I pressed for details, she said she didn't know his name because he hadn't told her yet, and because he didn't talk very much anyway, but that he did answer when she asked him questions, only not out loud, more like in the way you hear someone talking when you're underwater. I walked her back outside and made her show me exactly where she meant, and she pointed along the route from the corner, tracing the edge of the lawn with her finger and stopping at the neighbor's mailbox, then at the big maple tree, then at the patch of dead grass by the hydrant. There was no one there, of course, just a quiet residential street with bikes tipped over in driveways and a dog barking somewhere behind a fence, and I told her she must have been mistaken, that maybe she'd noticed the shadow of someone walking farther back or the reflection from a car window, but she frowned at me the whole time like I was missing something obvious. She didn't mention him again that evening, and I started to convince myself I'd overreacted until my wife came home and said our daughter had asked her whether people could walk without making footprints. The next day, I picked her up myself instead of letting her take the bus, partly because I told myself it would save time, and partly because I wanted to see the route with my own eyes. But she was disappointed and asked if the man would be waiting anyway. I asked her what she meant, and she said he always waited at the corner across from the bus stop, and that sometimes he stood very still for a long time, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to move yet. I watched the sidewalk while we walked home and saw nothing out of place, But when we reached our driveway, she stopped, turned around, and waved at the empty air beside the mailbox. "He says bye," she told me. I didn't let her walk alone after that. 2 days later, my wife forgot something at work and came home late, close to dark, and when she walked in the door, she asked why I'd been standing at the end of the driveway just watching the street, which didn't make any sense because I'd been inside folding laundry the whole time. She insisted she'd seen someone our height, wearing my jacket, hands in pockets, facing away from the house, and when she called my name, the figure stepped off the curb and disappeared between 2 parked cars. That night, while we were locking up, our daughter asked if the man could come closer now that both of us had seen him. Story 12. My wife keeps receiving texts from my phone while I'm asleep. The first time it happened, she thought I was joking, which was fair because the message itself didn't say anything strange at all. She was standing at the kitchen counter scrolling through recipes on her tablet while I sat at the table paying bills, and she laughed and told me to stop being dramatic when I asked what she was talking about. "You," she said, holding up her phone. "You just texted me, did you lock the door?" I frowned and pulled my phone out of my pocket. Screen dark, no new messages sent. "I didn't text you." She tilted her head and checked again. "Well, it says it came from you." I stood up and walked over to her, expecting to see some obvious explanations like a scheduled message or an accidental tap. But the timestamp was current and the thread showed my contact photo and name, and the bubble color matched mine exactly. I told her it was probably a glitch and she shrugged. But when I went into my own messages, there was nothing there, not even a draft. An hour later, while we were watching television, her phone buzzed again. "Did you hear that?" She looked at me. "I'm sitting right here." I took my phone out again. Still nothing. She showed me the message. Same number, same contact. I restarted my phone, checked for weird apps. Nothing. We forgot about it until the middle of the night when she nudged me awake and whispered that my phone had texted her again. I hadn't moved. My phone lay on the nightstand between us, face down, unlocked. The message said, "Turn over." I picked it up with a strange, tight feeling in my chest and saw that the screen was on, open to the messaging app. Cursor blinking in an empty bubble like someone had just finished typing. I asked her to show me her phone. She had 3 new messages, all from me, all sent while I was asleep. "Did you lock the door? Did you hear the don't move yet?" We checked the doors and windows, everything locked, the kids asleep, the house quiet. I turned my phone off completely, powered it down, set it on the dresser. We lay awake listening to the furnace kick on and off downstairs and the faint tick of the hallway clock. 10 minutes later, her phone buzzed again. "Why did you turn it off?" My wife stared at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. I turned my phone back on just long enough to call my own number. It rang from under the bed. We didn't keep the phone there. I crouched down and lifted the dust ruffle. My phone lay face up on the carpet, screen glowing. On it was a message being typed, not sent yet, letters appearing one by one. "I'm closer than you think." Story 13. My son keeps talking to someone in the back seat. When I'm driving, the first time it happened, I didn't even realize what he'd said until a few seconds later, because it came out so casually, tucked between complaints about homework and a request to stop for fries on the way home from practice. I don't think he likes music that loud. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half smiling, ready to tell him that nobody in the car had any say over the radio except the driver. And then I froze, because our daughter was in the front passenger seat scrolling through her phone, and the other back seat was empty except for a soccer bag and a crumpled hoodie. "Who doesn't?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. "The guy back here." My daughter looked up. "What guy?" He leaned forward in his booster seat, peering into the space beside him like he was trying to be polite. "The one by the window." I slowed at the next light and checked the mirror again, angling it toward the far seat so I could see the headrest, the door handle, the reflection of passing cars sliding across the glass. Nothing. "You're sitting alone back there," I said. He frowned. "No, I'm not." When I dropped them off at home, I searched the car, checking the floor mats, under the seats, the trunk, even the little storage compartment in the back where snacks always got crushed. There was no one there, no footprints on the upholstery, no signs anyone had been sitting beside him. But he watched me with the calm curiosity kids have when adults are clearly doing something unnecessary. "He doesn't get out when the car stops," he added. That night at dinner, he asked my wife if she could move her seat forward tomorrow, because the man liked having legroom, and she laughed at first until she realized he wasn't smiling, and that he was cutting his chicken into very neat, careful pieces without looking down. I told myself it was imagination, that maybe he'd picked it up from a movie trailer or a story at school. But the next day, he asked if the man could ride in the front just once, and my wife dropped her fork. I started paying attention after that, watching the mirror more, checking reflections in the glass, turning around at red lights and scanning the empty seat so often that my daughter asked why I kept doing it. On the fourth day, he said the man had leaned forward between the seats and asked where we were going, and when I snapped that there was nobody there, he looked genuinely confused and told me that I didn't have to be rude because the man hadn't done anything yet. "Yet," my wife repeated later. I installed a dash camera that weekend, not telling the kids what it was for, just saying I wanted it in case someone rear-ended us, and mounted it so it could see the whole cabin as well as the road. The first 2 trips were normal. The third, on the way back from the grocery store at dusk, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the app. Inside the car, I opened it at a stoplight. At first it showed the 4 of us exactly where we should be. Then, between frames, the empty seat beside my son darkened, not like a shadow from outside, like something had filled the space. The upholstery compressed. A seatbelt slid sideways as if brushed by a shoulder. My son leaned away from it. I nearly ran the red light. When we got home, I replayed it on the tablet. My wife watched over my shoulder, hand over her mouth. The footage didn't glitch, didn't distort. Something had been sitting there, tall enough that its knees should have been in frame. Its outline blurred just enough that the camera couldn't resolve details, but the shape of a head leaned toward my son as if listening to him talk. My daughter whispered, "I sit there sometimes." My son shook his head. "No, you don't. He does." We stopped using that car. Took the older one instead. For 2 days, nothing happened. On the 3rd morning, my son asked why the man had followed us. "Followed us how?" "He's in this one too," he said, glancing at the back seat before buckling himself in. That night, the dash cam from the other car sent me an alert. Parked in the driveway, engine off, empty. The interior camera showed a shape settling into the back seat, alone, waiting. Story 14. My wife keeps finding someone else's clothes in the laundry. It began with a sock that didn't belong to any of us. My wife held it up between 2 fingers while standing in front of the dryer, turning it slowly like she expected a name to appear if she stared long enough. Gray wool, thick and heavy, too big for our kids and definitely not mine, with a dark stain along the heel that looked like dried mud. "Did you wash this with your stuff?" she asked. I shook my head and leaned over to check the rest of the load, pulling out familiar shirts, jeans, pajamas, towels, and then another sock that matched the first one exactly. We both stared at them. I joked that maybe one of the neighbors had lost them in our machine somehow, even though that didn't make sense, but she didn't laugh. And when she checked the hamper in our room, she found a third one tangled in the sheets. The next day, she found a shirt in the dryer that none of us recognized. Pale blue cotton with the collar stretched and buttons missing. And she set it on the counter with the socks and asked me again, slower this time, whether I was sure it wasn't mine. It wasn't. Our son watched us from the doorway and asked why we were washing the quiet man's clothes. My wife crouched in front of him and asked what quiet man he meant, and he shrugged and said the one who sometimes stood in the hallway at night and smelled like the garage, which didn't make any sense until I realized that the strange clothes did carry a faint odor of oil and damp concrete. We started keeping the laundry room door closed after that. It didn't help. The pile grew anyway. Pants with torn cuffs, a jacket with deep pockets full of gravel, a sweater stiff with dried water stains. None of it fit anyone in the house. One evening, I came home to find my wife sitting at the table with the clothes folded neatly in front of her, like she was trying to organize them into something logical. "They were in the washer again," she said. "I didn't put them there." I checked the security camera that covered the hallway outside the laundry room. At 1:19 a.m. the night before, someone walked past the doorway carrying a basket. Tall, wearing the pale blue shirt, bare feet leaving dark footprints on the floor. The face never turned toward the camera. I went upstairs to wake my wife. She was asleep. Both kids were asleep. The basket in the footage wasn't ours. The next morning, every piece of clothing was gone. Hamper empty, dryer empty, counter bare. That afternoon, my wife found one last thing in the laundry room sink. A single sock, still wet, stuck to the porcelain, and inside it, something hard pressed against the fabric like a knuckle. Story 15. My daughter keeps asking why we don't use the other front door. The first time she mentioned it, I assumed she meant the garage. We were unloading groceries in the driveway, bags cutting into my fingers while my wife balanced a sack of oranges on her hip, when our daughter wandered up the walkway and stopped in front of the house, like she'd forgotten which place was ours. "Why don't we go in that way anymore?" I frowned. "What way?" She pointed past the porch, toward the siding between the living room windows. "The other door." I followed her finger. White clapboard, 2 windows, brick foundation, no door. "There isn't one," she squinted. "There was." My wife shot me a look. "Where?" "Right there, with the narrow steps." We told her she was mistaken. Kids mix up houses, dreams bleed into memory. She didn't argue, but she kept glancing at that spot every time we came home. A few days later, my wife texted me from work asking if we'd had someone fix the front of the house recently because there were fresh footprints in the mulch under the windows. Boot prints, deep, leading up to the wall, then stopping. No ladder, no marks on the siding. That night, our daughter asked if she could sleep with her light on because the other door kept opening in the dark. I walked outside with a flashlight. No door, just siding, cold boards, solid. I knocked, normal hollow thump, nothing behind it. 2 nights later, we woke to the sound of hinges. Soft, rhythmic, metal working back and forth, not squeaking exactly. Testing. It came from the front of the house. I stood in the hallway while my wife called out my name and the kids shifted in their rooms. The sound stopped when I reached the living room. In the morning, a rectangle of frost clung to the outside wall where no door should be, even though the rest of the siding was dry. The shape had a handle. That afternoon, I peeled back a section of siding. Behind it was drywall. Untouched, no frame, no studs, no gap. That night, the knocking came from inside the wall. Story 16. My son keeps saying, "Someone waits in the crawl space." The first time he mentioned it, we were in the kitchen doing homework while my wife cooked. The smell of garlic and onions filling the air as rain tapped against the windows and the radio hummed quietly in the background. He was supposed to be practicing spelling words, but kept glancing toward the hallway that led to the guest room and the utility closet, twisting his pencil between his fingers until the eraser tore loose. "Is the crawl space supposed to make noise?" he asked. I didn't look up right away. "What noise?" "The slow one." My wife paused mid-chop and stared at him over the cutting board. "What crawl space?" He blinked. "The one under the house." We didn't have one. The inspection report had been very clear when we bought the place. Slab foundation, no basement, no crawl space, no access hatches anywhere inside or out. I told him that, gently, and he frowned like I'd corrected him on something obvious. "But that's where he waits." "Who waits?" my wife asked. "The guy who doesn't like the new door." My stomach tightened. "What guy?" He shrugged and went back to his paper. But he didn't write anything, just kept tracing the same letter over and over again until the page went gray. Later that night, after the kids were in bed and the house had settled into that hollow quiet that only shows up after midnight, I lay awake listening to the heater kick on and off and the refrigerator click in the kitchen. At some point, I realized there was another sound layered beneath it. Faint but steady, like someone slowly dragging the flat of their palm across concrete. It was coming from below us, not from the walls, not from the ceiling, from underneath the floor. I slid out of bed and padded into the hallway, crouching down with my ear pressed to the hardwood outside our son's room while my wife watched from behind me with her arms folded tight around herself. The sound stopped completely. I waited. Nothing. I knocked lightly on the floor with my knuckles. Solid. No hollow echo. No vibration. When I stood, my wife whispered that she'd heard it too. The next morning, our son asked if the man had moved closer overnight. "Closer to what?" I asked. "To the kitchen." My wife nearly dropped her mug. We spent the afternoon checking every closet and storage space in the house, moving boxes, shining flashlights behind the water heater, crawling around the garage with spiderwebs sticking to our hair while the kids watched cartoons too loudly in the living room. There was no trapdoor, no access panel, no vent big enough for anything larger than a raccoon, and certainly nothing that looked like it led under the house. That evening, my daughter asked why the floor by the pantry felt cold, even though the heater was running. I knelt. The tile there was colder, just one square. When I pressed my palm flat against it, the chill seeped into my skin like I'd touched metal in winter. That night, I set up one of the spare cameras from the garage and aimed it down the hallway at floor level, angled so it could see the baseboards and the shadowy gap beneath the pantry door. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was feeding into something imaginary, but I left it recording anyway. At 2:27 a.m., my phone vibrated, motion detected. I opened the feed. At first it showed nothing but the empty hallway, moonlight stretching pale rectangles across the floor, the pantry door shut and perfectly still. Then the grout line between two tiles near the wall darkened. Not with shadow, with movement. Something pushed upward from below, just enough to flex the floor. Then it relaxed, did it again. Slowly, testing. Behind me in the bedroom, my son whispered my name. I spun around. He stood in the doorway, eyes half closed, blanket trailing behind him. He says you're making him nervous. I carried him back to bed without taking my eyes off the hallway. In the morning, the pantry tile was cracked, a hairline fracture running straight through the center like something underneath had pressed a fingernail against it and decided to try harder next time. Story 17. My wife keeps hearing. Someone used the shower after everyone's asleep. It started as one of those half comments people make when they aren't fully awake yet, the kind you nod at without processing while rolling over and pulling the blanket tighter. I think someone just took a shower. I blinked at the ceiling. What? My wife shifted beside me, pushing herself up on one elbow, while the clock on the dresser glowed 2:46 a.m. in soft red numbers. The water was running. You probably heard the pipes. She shook her head slowly. No, I heard the curtain. That got my attention. Our pipes groan and click when the heater cycles, but the shower curtain makes a very specific plastic whisper when someone pulls it across the rod. And I knew exactly what she meant because I'd heard it thousands of times myself. I didn't get up. I said, I know. We lay there listening. The house was quiet again, just the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the distant rush of traffic through wet pavement outside. After a minute, she exhaled and lay back down, muttering that she was probably dreaming. 2 nights later, she nudged me awake again. Same tone, same clock time within a few minutes. Someone's in the bathroom. This time I sat up. I didn't hear water, but I did hear something else. A soft rhythmic tapping, like drops hitting porcelain. Drip, pause, drip, pause. I slipped out of bed and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was dark. Kids' doors shut, bathroom light off. The floor felt colder than it should have. When I cracked the bathroom door, the room was empty and bone dry. The tub spotless, mirror fogless, towels hanging exactly where they belonged. In the morning, she asked if I'd showered before work. I hadn't. She didn't argue, but she kept glancing down the hall while she poured coffee, like she expected steam to come curling out from under the door at any second. By the 4th night, I heard it too, not loud, just enough. The scrape of the curtain ring sliding across the rod, followed by the faint click of the faucet handle turning. I froze in bed. My wife whispered my name. I didn't answer. I waited. The water didn't turn on. The sound stopped. When I checked, the bathroom was empty again, but the floor mat in front of the tub was damp. Not soaked, just enough to leave darker footprints where someone had stood for a long time. Bare feet, too narrow, too long. They led from the tub to the vent in the ceiling, stopped beneath it. We pulled the vent cover down the next day. Nothing inside but darkness and a faint metallic smell like old pipes. No moisture, no mold, no insulation disturbed. That night, I sat on the couch with the hallway light on and the TV muted, pretending to scroll while actually listening for every change in the house's rhythm. At 2:41 a.m., the bathroom door creaked, not opening, just settling. Then the curtain whispered again, longer this time, deliberate. I didn't rush in. I watched the hallway. The light above the sink flicked on by itself. Steam began creeping out under the door. My phone buzzed, motion alert from the hallway camera. The feed showed the bathroom door slowly swinging inward. Inside, the mirror fogged over from top to bottom. A handprint appeared in the steam, then another beside it. High, too high for anyone in our family. The curtain bowed outward like someone was leaning against it from inside the tub. I ran. The room was empty, the tub dry, mirror clear. But the vent cover lay on the floor, bent outward, like something had climbed down through it. My wife didn't want to sleep upstairs anymore. Neither did the kids. We camped in the living room that night. At 2:44 a.m., the upstairs shower turned on. Full blast, water hammering, porcelain so loud it echoed through the house. And in the hallway above us, footsteps crossed wet tile.